Shraddha, on your cue, let me know when we're live.
Yeah.
Great. Hi, everyone. Very warm good afternoon. Appreciate your time today. Thanks for joining this webinar on the last mile strategy for Snap. As we all know, Snap is around the corner, right? As a matter of fact, a day away and begins on the 10th, of course. This time we will have 3 days of Snap spread across weeks, right? And again, for everyone who's in attendance today, of course, some of you must be first-time test takers and a little anxious. Really don't know what's going to happen, what questions are is a Snap going to throw at you, how are you going to take the exam. A lot of stressful questions, right? But fret not. We at HDFC Credila have put together this webinar to help you out there. Today we have a panel of those who are on the other side of the fence as you are today. They climbed that fence, are on the other side now, and a proud part of the Symbiosis legacy. We have with us today Isha Chauhan and Chaitanya Chaudhary, both students of SIBM Pune. Welcome, Isha. Welcome, Chaitanya. Thanks for doing this with us, and I
Hi.
really appreciate your time today. Right. I will quickly introduce our guest panel first. Isha is a first year student studying marketing right now at SIBM Pune. She hails from Lucknow, Uttar Pradesh, and also holds a bachelor's in business administration. Right. And just something that I share with Isha is this enthusiasm for doing a lot of business competitions. Right. So Isha is a winner for Born with Pidlit and also a national finalist in Godrej Loud. And that's like Symbiosis legacy, right? SIBM legacy, where you have a lot of winners from Godrej Loud. So you continue that tradition. So congratulations on that, Isha. And moving on to Chaitanya. Chaitanya is also a marketing student from SIBM Pune. Hails from Visakhapatnam, but was raised in Jamshedpur. And Chaitanya is a defense enthusiast, right? He wrote CDS and AFCAT, cleared both exams in the first attempt. But it's quite an interesting move, Chaitanya. If you could quickly touch upon and tell us, everyone in the audience today, what made you move from defense to management? That's quite an interesting change.
I was a defense enthusiast from the beginning itself. So when I was in my
Mhm.
undergrad, I started preparing for CDS and FCAT. And once I
Okay.
was done with my undergraduation, post that I appeared for both the exams. I happened to clear both the exams. But then post that, immediately COVID happened. So the SSB procedure at the Defense Academy got delayed. And then
Okay.
once that also started, I appeared for it. I happened to clear that as well. But due to on a medical ground, I was rejected. So that was a sort of a permanent rejection. So because of that, I had to switch fields, and this was something that was very related to the management skills that is required out there,
Hmm.
because I feel you
Hmm.
need to be a leader to handle the managerial positions as well. And the
Right.
aptitude, the sort of aptitude that I had gained over the years, I felt this is the perfect fit for me, and I can manage things really well. And that is the reason why I pursued an MBA post that.
Well, that's quite interesting, Chaitanya. Hard luck there. But pretty sure that for all the skills that you have in you, right, that you could have put to use for in the service of the nation, you could probably use it to improve an organization, right? So that's always there. Great. Thank you for joining us today. Again, as I said, we really appreciate your time today. And for everyone in attendance, we have a chat box, right? So as I said, the objective of this webinar is to ensure that we get all your questions answered, all your queries resolved, right? And Chaitanya, Isha are going to help us to just write that, right? So there's a chat box in which you can punch in your questions. Of course, through this webinar, I'll pick up those questions. Mind you, a lot of questions might be similar, right? So what I'll try and do is crunch those questions into one and get answers from both Chaitanya and Isha today, right? So let's get started. So Chaitanya and Isha, what I'd like to know is, we'll first start off with Isha on this one. Again, as I said, the exam starts on Saturday. It's a 60 question exam, I believe, right? For 1 hour. There's 1 point for every correct answer, but 0.25 gets taken away if you answer that incorrectly, right? There's a lot of anxiety in the minds of a lot of students around negative marking, right? Isha, very quickly, what we'd like to know is what was your approach, because the pattern was very similar to the last one, right? What we'd like to know was what
Right.
was your exam strategy, or what was your test taking strategy when you took the snap last year?
Yeah, sure. So, my approach throughout has been to secure your position in the exam, right? So you have to aim for all the low-hanging fruits first. So it's a moderate difficulty exam, right? And so it is speed-based. So you're not supposed to be emotionally attached to a particular question or a particular topic, no matter how strongly you feel that you can crack that. So, there's no such thing as divide certain amount of time amongst different sections. So what I did was I kind of sorted out those questions that I knew for sure that I could solve within 1 minute, in maybe less than 1 minute. Even though there were topics that I knew really well, but I thought that if it could take more than 1 minute to solve those questions, I would not touch upon that. So that has been my strategy, and I took a lot of mocks. Now, this might not work for everyone, but the trick is to not get emotionally attached to your scores. So I did it to mentally kind of train myself that sometimes when I know that I really want to do a question, I might have to leave that to be able to cover maybe two or three questions in that amount of time.
No, that's an interesting answer. Chaitanya, what are your views on this? How did you attempt the exam? What was your strategy going into Snap last year?
Definitely, it's mostly the same as she mentioned very clearly that about the low-hanging fruits thing. So the main idea of giving mocks is that you cover all the questions. So the thing is, so the first 10 minutes that you sit for, you cover the entire easy questions in the part. So let's say you start with the verbal section first. So in the verbal section, you go for the easier questions first, like the ones that you're able to solve in like 5 to 10 seconds. And I can assure you this, that if you're sitting for the verbal section, the answers that you know, you'll cover it in like 5 to 10 seconds itself. That is a thing for Snap at least. Leave aside the cat and all the other exams. And post that, when you're moving to the logical reasoning section, or maybe if you're very good at quant, so always work on your strengths first. People say that no, you should work on your weaknesses, but when you're working on your weaknesses, that is a part you do before the exams, not on the day of the exam. You always play on your strengths during the day of the exam. So you try to cover up the weaknesses, but move on to the strengths at that time. So you start with the quant section then, and then you start working on that as well. So since it's a speed-based exam, as Isha mentioned, then you need to be very quick with the math, as in the calculations and all of that, because mostly you won't be getting the calculators over there as well. So, and for the strategy for exam for verbal, I would suggest, since there are idioms and phrases asked, there are a lot of vocabulary questions. Like there are direct questions for sure. There are no para jumbles and all of that. Like there are para jumbles, but there are one or two, and they're very easy to do, depending on the scale of the exam. So if you are talking about that, for that, what you can refer to is Norman Lewis, and also Renan Martin is a great book to go ahead with that. Now, talking about the other sections, you make sure that within the first 30 minutes, at least within the first 30 minutes, you have covered question 1 to question 60. By that, I mean, at least you've gone through the entire set, and also the easier sets, the one that you feel like, okay, I've seen this question, I know how to solve it, you immediately solve it. You shouldn't go for the questions that you feel, even if you're dicey a bit, like even if you're 0.5 percent dicey about it, you shouldn't go for that question. You should move on to the next question. There have been times during my mocks as well as in the main exam wherein I've left like 7 to 8 questions back to back, just to make sure that I cover up the questions that I know properly and show that I'm very confident for the others. Because when you cover 1 to 60 and you have still 30 minutes to go, you know there's only some part of it that has to be covered. And now you have a lot of time to give on to that questions. And since you have covered a lot of questions in between, you know that, okay, you gain that confidence, okay, I'm able to solve the questions. It's not even that my day is going bad, or maybe it might happen that the paper is a bit difficult as compared to last year, or maybe the difficulty level has raised. So that is the thing. So that is mostly that you should focus on. And that is, I would say, that is why you should appear for mocks, at least 10 mocks, I would suggest. And it's not even like that is the bare minimum. You can go for more than that, but never go for less than that. The reason being that only in one exam you won't be able to get acquainted to a particular methodology. So Isha might have a different methodology for solving the question paper. I might have a different one. So since I was very good in maths, just to get habituated to the fact that I have to leave math questions to move on to the easier questions, I had to get accustomed to that. Because when I was on my first question, if there is the first question is of quant, if I'm not able to solve it, I get that, okay, why am I not able to solve it? Being a mathematics honors. So you shouldn't have that inhibition. Rather, you should move on to the easier questions. Once you get time, you can definitely come back to the difficult questions. Because if the question paper is difficult for you, and you've really prepared hard for it, then definitely it's going to be difficult for the others as well. Ultimately, the thing is that it's a percentile based game. it's not only how you perform. It's not a school-based exam that you score 95 out of 100, then you are 95 percent. It's more about how others do as well. So to do better than them, you need to work on the low-hanging fruits first. So that should be the strategy before exam as well when you're giving the mocks.
Well, thanks for that answer, Chaitanya. And it's interesting when with all these points that Isha and you have just tabled, right? It takes me back to the time when I was taking Snap. Even I managed to crack the exam, and I had a very similar approach. And I'm glad to know that the approach has been followed through and through. It's not changed a lot, right? Um, what typically my approach would also be to try and brisk read, like fan through the entire question paper, try and find out what I used to call as sitters, right? Typically, sitters were those that you could just attempt in first glance and then kill off the question, right, with an answer. So that is an approach that I would typically take. And an interesting point that you mentioned was, the percentile, right? Everyone has a target college in their mind, right? For example, if you're targeting SIBM Pune, of course, the cutoff somewhere is always year on year in the 90th percentile, right? So you want to know that the number of questions that we want to attempt and try and get right to be a part of the 98th percentile, right, in order to get that coveted call, right? So that makes a whole lot of difference. So what in your mind is so typically what would be the right number of questions or the exact number of questions according to you that one should get right to be able to get a call, say, from an SIBM Pune?
Okay, so in my opinion, at least when you're targeting, you should target 45 plus. The reason being that it's not only about the percentile that you score, but for Snap specifically, the raw score is taken. It's not only the
Hmm.
percentile, because when you're
Right,
calculating the merit list for the final selection in a particular college, the raw score is
right.
taken into consideration, and that is the weightage for that is 50%. The best part about Snap and the colleges under it, the top colleges under it, is that you are not judged on the basis of how you performed in the past, like your 10th percentage, 12th percentage, and all of that. It's purely on the basis of how you performed on the Snap day as well as on the GDPI session, GDPI vote session.
Right.
So basically, both have a weightage of 50%. And if you have scored really well in your written exam, that gives you a go ahead in the GEPI vote session as well, because
Right.
ultimately that is how the merit is calculated. So I would suggest 45 plus is a good score, is a very good score to be honest, because obviously you won't have 100% accuracy. So now it
Right.
depends on the accuracy as well. Depending on the accuracy, you need to target the number of questions. So for that, you need to check in the mocks as well, like how many questions are you able to solve in the beginning, and depending on
Hmm.
that, what is the percentage of accuracy that you've had, depending on the number of questions that you've solved. So 45 plus questions with with an accuracy of around 90%, 85, 90% is a good enough score in my opinion. Apart from that, even when you're giving mocks,
Hmm.
so in the beginning of the mocks, never target 45 plus in the beginning itself. Maybe it might be a
Okay.
slow start, but get accustomed to the mocks, get accustomed to the pattern of the exam, because it might happen that you might have recently given appeared for CAT, and then you might have recently appeared for IIFT and all of those other exams, and then you're sitting for a completely different exam because it is completely speed based exam. While CAT and IIFT are not speed based exams, it is mostly about solving the most, like the number of questions that you can, and solving the right number of questions. But in this thing, it's mostly about the number of questions that you solve and how well you are able to solve it with the maximum percentage of accuracy that you can pull off. So in
Right.
the beginning phase
So,
of it, at least target 30 plus questions. When you
uh-huh.
get confidence for that, you move on to 35 plus, 40 plus, and then 45 plus. Gradually, the increase has to be gradually, because what happens is when you target 45 plus in the beginning itself, it might not work out for you. You might get depressed, and then you feel like, okay, whatever the toppers are going to target, or maybe we're going to score, I'm not able to do so. So that shouldn't be the thing. I've always gr- I have always believed in growing gradually, and that is the thing
Hmm.
I think that will definitely help.
Well, that's an interesting answer, right? Because Snap is only a day away, right? We all know for a fact that Snap begins on Saturday, right? Now we have an interesting question from Ria Chaudhary, right? And again, the question here is that how can one improve accuracy in the last few days to Snap? Again, to answer your question, Ria, and I'll take this first, right? And probably we can go to Isha and Chaitanya there. Again, it depends on the number of attempts. I believe you will be taking the Snap. If it's only on Saturday, right? If it's your only attempt at this exam, what I would suggest will be that you try and brush up everything that will help you get to an answer quickly. For example, if fractions are involved, like a lot of fractions are involved in quantitative ability, right? My take would be to try and ensure that you are fast and thorough with your fractions, right? If you're focusing or looking at verbal ability, you would might want to try and ensure that your grammar is up to the mark. You'd want to revise your fractions. You'd want to revise your grammar, and I believe you get the drift, right? Typically, try and sharpen those skills that will help you get to an answer quickly, because snap is just a day away, and I'm assuming that Saturday will be your only attempt, right? And you always have a week to try and take a couple of mocks. Try and see for everything that you've learned so far if there are other ways to try and get to an answer than your regular methods, right? But other than that, Isha and Chaitanya, what are your views on this? With Snap just a few days away, right? How can one improve their accuracy?
Yeah. So
We'll
I
start off
think
with
just to
maybe
add
Isha.
on. Yeah, so just to add on to what you said, it's very right. There's some things that you have to have on your tips for a speed-based test, right? So the ratios, the square roots, the cube roots, these are some things that will help you tremendously when you're trying to go through quants and also reasoning for that matter. And then I would suggest to cover a lot of previous year questions because the pattern has more or less been same. So there are a few topics like calendars, clocks. Those are really easy bets, right? It's going to take you 1 or 2 hours if you haven't started at all. It's going to take you 2 hours of maximum, I think, to cover those
Right.
topics in depth. And I think there's a short question from 7 to 8 selected topics. So when you go through mocks and previous years papers, you can identify those topics. That's bound to increase your accuracy. And I'd like to share my strategy. So I used to divide the questions in 3 sets. So the first, say 30 to 40 questions were the ones that I was sure of. Then the next, maybe 10 to 12 were slightly dicey and questions that would take more time. And then there were 7, 8 questions that I would not touch because even if I know them, even if I think I can solve them, they would take a lot of time. So I think that you might try the strategy during your mocks and see if it works for you because it did work for me. So when I'm sure of 35 questions, I know that I'm scoring at least 35. Now the rest of my time is for the next 10 to 12 questions where I'll try my luck. And another thing that you should make sure of is not to make a lot of guesses because there's a lot of negative marking, right? And a lot of people lose a lot of marks because of that. So with mocks, I try to figure out what is that range that I can take educated guesses on. So you calculate if you're maybe secured 40 questions and you're taking a guess for 5 questions, how many marks you would lose. So are you landing somewhere in the range of 45 to 46 still? So that is one thing that I would suggest you try.
Thanks for that, Isha, because this another question that we have right now is on how does one employ a stop loss strategy while attempting the snap exam, right? Or how does one prevent getting negative marks? And I think you very well answered that there by whereby we said that by securing questions, right, that you're absolutely sure about, right, that you're absolutely confident about. Once you secure those questions, maybe you can take that next step and try and attempt all those questions that you feel are doable or can be cracked, right, rather than getting too risky. Because and again, it depends, as Chaitanya again said earlier, that it depends on individuals, right? Every test taker might have a strategy that is different from others. For example, when I took the exam, I am typically a risk averse person, right? So similar to what you called out earlier, I would try and secure all those questions that I'm absolutely sure about, right? And then go for those that I think that I think could be cracked, right? I mean, that's the key to trying to avoid negative marking, right? There's another question that we have is from Vedika, who wants to know how many mocks should one take in the last 2 weeks of Snap.
Yes.
Maybe Chaitanya, you
So
can answer that.
yeah, so since there are 2 weeks for your paper, I would definitely suggest you to go beyond 10, and I think 15 to 20 is the optimum range. Like you can do those many papers, but the thing about that is you need to have multiple access to multiple coaching material for that, because generally what happens is one particular coaching material provides you with 10 mocks in a go. So one thing that you can do is that I did as well was you can appear for 10 mocks which are completely made by the particular coaching institutes, and the other 5 to 10 would be from the Not 5 to 10, yeah, maybe 5 to 10. The reason being that every year there are three papers and three different. So considering that for the past 2 3 years there have been 60 marks question pattern. So what you can do is you can go for another six papers, which are completely exactly the replica of the actual exam. So that would be really helpful. That should be covered towards the end of it, so that once you have done with your mock exams, you have a strategy in hand. Then when you appear for the actual papers that have appeared in the past and you score really well, you gain real confidence for that as well, for the main paper as well. Even if you don't, that is completely fine. One thing, as Isha mentioned earlier as well, is never get affected by your mocks, because that is not a replica of your actual day performance. For example, I'll give my example itself. There was a mock wherein I scored only 67% or 75 percentile. The reason for that is also that a lot of less test takers appear for the mocks. So gradually your
Right.
percentile decreases. But even if you're not
I
performing
believe
well,
that
that is not
answers.
a replica.
Absolutely, yeah. I believe that answers your question, Vedika, because we have one more question on how can someone improve their scores if they're not doing very well, of course, according to their standards in mocks, right? And it's a very interesting and a beautiful point that you've made, Chaitanya, is that not to dwell too much on your scores from mocks, rather look at mocks as, another asset that can help you practice, right? Not dwell too much on your scores, because they are not true indicators of how you would fare in the exam eventually, right? Mocks are more like a portal to newer questions, maybe newer strategies. It's all about keeping on, you keep on practicing, and who knows, you might just discover a new strategy, a finer approach than what you are utilizing or implementing for a question or a set or a comprehension, right? So you never know. So just keep at it, keep on practicing those. Don't dwell too much on your scores, right? As I said, they're not reflective of how you would perform eventually in the final exam. How do you feel about that, Isha? For someone who's not doing so well in mocks right now, with just a few days to go to snap, what should they, with what mindset should they go in and take those mocks and eventually the exam?
Yeah, so I'd start off with my personal experience. I had never, for those of you who are apprehensive about your scores, I had never scored a 98 or a 99 percentile in any of my mocks. So, like Chaitanya said, and you said rightly, that do not dwell on your scores. Take it as an exercise to kind of train your brain to perform at maximum efficiency in 1 hour, right? And one thing I'd also like to add is when you're taking mocks, before taking mocks, get an idea of the questions that have appeared in previous years. Sometimes there are a few mocks we land upon which are quite digressed from what we actually have in exams. So the last leg is not the time where you would want to confuse yourself or maybe pick up new topics to study, right? Once you're done, although that having said that, there are a couple of small topics like I mentioned earlier, calendars, clock, etc. These are small topics and you definitely have questions from them, except those do not pick up heavy topics just to increase your accuracy. Try to cover up those questions and those parts that you think you can do and are well doable within 1 minute. Also, there are a few questions in quants that take more than 1 minute. Sometimes maybe the paper's difficulty is such that it might take you more than 1 minute. So you have to optimize that. There's some other section where you would want to be quicker and leave more time for the other section, which is why what Chaitanya said is very important, that you have to skim through the entire paper at once. Take a glance through all sections so you can strategize accordingly. And then to kind of increase your score, you have to maybe make a note of the strategies that you followed in one mock. And then when you're taking your next mock, you're not supposed to repeat the same mistakes. Maybe you spent too much time on one question, and then during your analysis, you realize that there were these two, three questions that you could have done, but you could not because there was no time. So do not repeat the same mistakes in the further mocks that you take. So I think that should help.
Absolutely, that's such a fine answer, right? Do not dwell, as Isha rightly said, do not dwell on your scores from mocks, right? Take your scores from mocks with a pinch of salt. If it's any consolation to you, when I was I remember still this last mock that I took before I took my CAT back in 2012. So I'd scored around 38 percentile in my mock, but went on to get a 98 percentile in my CAT. So as I said, it's not a true indicator of how you will do exactly in the exam. right? Try and formulate a strategy though. This one thing that I don't think we've touched upon is that mocks are essentially something that will help you create a strategy for your final exam though, right? I mean, one way to look at it is just to give you a perspective, right? Maybe you could start off with a section that you're really comfortable with, right? Try and tackle that. As Isha and Chaitanya rightly pointed out earlier, this is an exam where you're always crunched for time, right? What you could probably do is start off with a section that you're really comfortable with. Let's, for example, say that you're comfortable with verbal ability. You try and tackle all those questions, right? Ensure that you save enough time that could be probably utilized in a section that you're not so comfortable with, right? Start off with your forte always. Try and save time. You could possibly use that time for another section where you think you could maximize, but are not too comfortable with. That's one strategy, one way to look at it, right? So that's that on mocks, right? How do you feel about, since you're talking about this now, how do you feel about, starting off with the section of your choice, Chaitanya? Is that a right approach to take? Because, again, from experience, it has worked for me and for certain test takers, but not sure how comfortable other test takers would be. What's your take on that? How do you feel about starting off with the section that's your forte?
Yeah, so there are two ways to look at it. I would say the first being that when you solve the more number of questions, you get more confident about it. So
Right.
that is the reason why I used to start with quant. But there was also one strategy that I also tried before that as well. The strategy being that since I'm very good at quant and very accustomed to it, I used to attempt it at the last, so that even if I have 10 minutes in hand, I can solve still more than 15 questions in quant itself. So that's what I'm saying. There are two ways of looking at it. Either you go with the one section that you're very comfortable with, so that you gain enough confidence to go with the other two sections as well, or else you keep that section for the end, because if you know, even if you spend a lot of time in the beginning sections as well, you have enough time in hand. Like even if you have lesser time in hand, you know for a fact that since you are very confident with this section and you're very good at it, you'll be able to solve more than average number of questions in that section as well. So, but my suggestion would still be go with the first section that you're very comfortable with. The reason being, it gives you confidence, it calms you down so that you are able to solve the other questions as well. Also, as I mentioned earlier, since you have to play on your strengths, you will be able to score more, and your accuracy will only increase if you solve the number of questions that you're confident about.
Right. How about you, Isha? What is your take on this approach?
Yeah, so I took a lot of mocks just to kind of find my strategy, what works best for me. And so I was strong in VARC, and then it was logical reasoning for me. And quants, I was the least uncomfortable with. So I always started with VARC. Now there are 15 questions, right? And I made it a point that I would cover my VARC section in, say, 7 to 8 minutes. Now that's like very ambitious, but that's what I tried to achieve throughout all my mocks. So that left me a lot of time for the section that I was not so sure about. And you cannot completely ignore one section, since you have to, kind of aim for more 45 plus. So yeah,
Right.
I was most comfortable with starting off with VARC, and then I had a lot of time in the end for cons, so I can really exercise my brain cells to kind of figure out those questions towards the end.
Right. Right. That is interesting. I am going to pick up a couple of questions here now. So there's one question that we have from Satvik, and Satvik wants to know what is the difficulty level like across the three slots of SNAP exam? Now, from what I understand, and of course, it's also mentioned on the website, is that there will be no normalization because the difficulty is more or less assumed to be same across. Is that correct, or would you want to add on to that?
So I
Maybe you
think
start off with
that's
Chaitanya or
yeah,
Isha?
sure.
Yeah, so the questions that the score is not normalized, rather the questions are normalized across the sections. So it might happen that, but then it completely depends on the person, as I said earlier as well, that you might feel that because you have covered a particular topic earlier and you're very good at it, you might feel that, okay, if I would have I would have given that particular sort exam, I would have scored more because the question that the section that I was very comfortable with was easier over there, but the slot that I sat for was not comfortable with me. So that is not a problem at all. And I can assure you that the three slots. Across the three slots, the difficulty level is the same. There's no disparity as such. And all you need to do, that is why every time I suggest everyone, I always tell them that cover the entire thing. Don't leave any topic aside, because you never know. It might happen the strongest section that you have, there might be a possibility that that would be the section, like the most difficult section over there. And the part that you haven't touched upon is the easiest one. So never do that. Always cover the entire thing. Try to brush up the topics. Definitely play on your strengths, but never lose out on the weaknesses as well.
Right. Maybe Isha, would you like to add on to that?
Yeah, so like Chaitanya said, the difficulty is more or less the same. It might be the case that one section in one exam is slightly on the tougher side, while some other section is easier. So subjectively, you might feel that this is a more difficult paper, but that could be because that is those are some questions that maybe you're not very thorough with. Which is why it's always a great idea to take all the exams. You know, you want to minimize your chances of leaving out those papers that could be the most comfortable for you. So yes, more or less it's standardized. There's nothing to worry about whether one paper that you miss would be very easy or very difficult.
Excellent. There's another question from Satvik, who wants to know what score should he be targeting, in case he hopes to get a call from SIBM Pune and Bangalore. Satvik, I'll answer that for you. Just going back to when Chaitanya called out earlier, 45 is what, in his opinion, a secure score to fetch a call from SIBM Pune. And of course, if you have applied for SIBM Bangalore, you should also get a call from SIBM Bangalore as well, right? Uh, but again, the objective going into an exam should be to try and maximize your score. Okay, don't try and the cutoffs play too much on your mind. Thankfully, there are no sectional cutoffs. I hope Chaitanya and Isha, my understanding is correct. There are no sectional cutoffs from what I understand, right? So your objective should be try and maximize your score. Try and get a 40, 42, 45 plus rather, to be able to secure calls from both these colleges. I hope you have the answer. Right. So moving on now, what I'd like to know is, what are the typical do's and don'ts, according to you, that one should follow, of course, during the course of this exam, maybe pre-exam, during the exam, or rather even post-exam as well. Isha, we'll start off with you first. What do you think are the do's and don'ts that one should keep in mind?
Right. So I would start off with mocks first, maybe. Try and not take a lot of mocks one day before the exam, because that score is going to maybe hit hard if it's low. And you want to be very, very confident on the D day. So one day before the exam, I would suggest you to relax, to calm down, maybe do things that kind of ease you, meditate or take proper sleep. And because that's just for 1 hour, you have to be at your absolute best. You have to focus. And if you stress about it too much, even if you do lose like 30 seconds overthinking or stressing about something, you're going to lose a lot, right? So a lot is at stake at that point in those 60 minutes. So that is a big don't. Do not stress about it. One day before the exam, do not try to cover up all the topics. And the best thing is, maybe you could, if you've made a note of your strategies, and if you've kind of observed through all your mocks what works the best for you and what doesn't, go through that. Other than that, do not be very adamant on trying to cover maybe all concepts or something. But yes, you can of course go through formulas. You can go through the list of ratios and squares and cube roots and all that. So that you must do.
Right. Any don'ts from you, maybe?
Yeah, so like I said, do not try to cover a lot of topics one day before the exam. Do not get too dwelled on your mock scores, and
Right.
do not try not to talk to a lot of people right before the exam. You really want to be centered before that. Just try to retain everything you've learned, and do not panic. So the best thing is that you have three chances, right? So it's not a do or die
Right.
situation before the exam. So maybe that should ease you out a little. And yes, that's it.
How about you, Chaitanya? Any do's and don'ts from you?
Yeah, so regarding the dues part, if you're really sure about taking admission somewhere here itself, Here as in from one of the SNAP colleges, definitely appear for more than one paper for SNAP. The second thing is give good number of mocks, but not, as Isha mentioned, but not just one day before the mock, the main exam. The mocks that you give, make sure the first two is that you definitely have a strategy in place. In fact, two strategy in place, because at times what happens is the complete pattern in the sense that the difficulty level might change, and then you might need to change your strategy depending on that. So the main idea of giving mocks is not getting accustomed to the questions, but rather it is getting accustomed to the strategies that you're going to have on the D-Day. So that is one of the do's. The next do I would say is relax one day before the exam. Even if you want to study, do it till 6 p.m. in the evening, and then post that, relax, spend time with your family, maybe watch a movie or something, do something that completely relaxes you, as Isha mentioned, and get a good night's sleep. At least 8 hours sleep is definitely important, because during that 1 hour, you need to be very fresh, and you need to have complete focus on your paper, and it should be like your brain is working at your best. That is something that I would suggest. The next do would be, as Isha mentioned earlier as well, go through the questions, the typical type of questions that always appear in Snap, so that you're well accustomed with it. What happens with a lot of people is just because of covering the portion, what they do is they leave out on the major part, which is actually asked in an exam like Snap, because it is not similar, not at all similar to maybe CAT or maybe IIFT. So do whatever preparation you're doing, do it completely in line with Snap. That is the most important thing. The don'ts that I would suggest is, do not leave anything aside. I've always suggested this to everyone, and I'll reiterate this point, that do not leave anything aside. The reason being that you never know that it might happen, the strength that you have it might happen that the most difficult question in that paper would be from that particular part. And the portion that you leave, it might happen that the most easiest question of the paper, even if you would have skimmed through that particular portion, you would have easily been able to solve that. So never leave anything, because it might sound really low, that is that it costs you only 1 mark, but it might happen that you might mark the wrong answer, you might lose out on 1.25 marks. That is the reason why I always say that attempt at least 45 plus questions, so that even if there are negatives, you still reach to a point wherein you can target the top colleges from here. The next don't is, don't spend too much time around people who are telling you about Snap, or maybe just telling you, "Okay, okay, do this or do that." You have
Right.
prepared really well, you know for a fact that what strategy you have. We are here just to help you out, to make you to fix the point that whatever you're following is completely fine, until unless you're working hard and you're actually having the right strategy in place for you, will work out for you completely well. So don't be around those people. Third thing would be, again, in the don't part, don't have an ego burst. Like what happens in the exams, I've seen most of the people coming out of the exams is like, अरे यार मेरे से ये question कैसे solve नहीं है? How was I not able to solve this particular question? This exam is not particularly about that. It is about the number of questions that you solve. So never be like you've already spent more than 2 minutes on a particular question just because you felt like, oh, I've covered this particular portion. How am I I'm not able to solve this particular question? Do not do that. It's very important to cover the entire question paper, and then come back to the past that you were not able to solve earlier. It is very important. So do not have that ego thing, and just focus on that. Even during the mocks, do not give a revenge mock. I've heard people saying that, oh shit, I was not able to score good in this particular mock. So immediately post the mock, you start giving the other mock, that so that you score well, and then you have that you calm down. Okay, and now I've scored well. That is never the case. Always when you have appeared for a mock, make sure that you analyze the mock through and through. Think about it, like what was your rationale when you were solving that particular question during the mock? What made you choose that particular question in the first half of the mock, or maybe in the second half of the mock, so that even in the main exam you can replicate that. And if you have a particular question of that sort, you have an idea, okay, this is the question that I saw in the second half of the mock, I should do the second to do this in the second half of the mock, it's the main exam as well, so that I score really high. So these are the things that I would suggest.
All of this is great advice, Chaitanya. Really, thank you for that. And one thing that I'm taking away from this is, of course, revenge mock. I mean, never heard of anything like that. But for all the advice that you and Isha have shared with everyone who's in attendance right now, there's a question that I'm looking at from Amrita, and what I would like to seek your advice or other suggestion on. or rather guidance for Amrita is on when analyzing mock snap papers. What Amrita finds right now is that in every paper she's making some inevitable mistakes, as she says, right? And she's making them every time. According to her, these are not silly mistakes, or these are not conceptual mistakes. These are not due to lack of concept or anything, right? Nor is she missing anything from the questions in terms of reading it right or extracting crucial data. But she's still in a dilemma. She's confused about where is it exactly that she's going wrong, and she doesn't know how to improve on this. What would be your advice to Amrita?
Isha,
Maybe
if you
Isha
could say.
will start off with you.
Yeah, sure. So, which is why it's very important to take mocks, right? You have to find out, you have to pick that point. Where is it that you're actually losing out on? Maybe you should check if you're taking a lot of guesses. Maybe the strategy that I suggested earlier, right? First, go through that questions that you're really sure of that you would do. And like you said, if you think that there are no conceptual constraints and that there's you're reading the questions right and everything. Oh, there. Just I would just like to add here that there are sections in logical reasoning and in verbal that we mostly ignore. Questions like critical reasoning, because you would think that this is going to be something very new in the exam. Why should I maybe practice too much? But one thing that worked for me, I went through a lot of YouTube videos on how people solve these questions. And while you might think that your approach is right, while you might think that you're going in the right way, it could not necessarily be the best way to solve that question. So when you go there are videos on how people solving live papers, right, on YouTube and mocks. So once you get a different perspective on those questions, maybe that could be some place that you would be going wrong. Other than that, just try to see how many questions are those that you get wrong. What is the negative marking? So maybe you would want to take less guesses. Maybe you would want to secure your position to maybe say a 40, and then take 10 questions that you could guess. Or there could be questions where you're just marking options based on the question, but sometimes the reverse trick works, right? When you solve the question through the options. So sometimes people, it
Right.
doesn't strike while solving the paper. So when you have those questions where you feel it's tricky, you pick uh, and do that also very intelligently, because you cannot just pick all four options and fit into the question, right? So if your answer somewhere lands around some number that's in the options, you can pick that number and fit it into question and like reverse solve the question. So I hope that helps.
Great answer, Isha. Anything from you, Chaitanya, on how should Amrita approach this?
Now, it depends on the section that you're going wrong in. It might happen that it would be happening mostly in verbal. So if that is happening, then it means that you're giving in more guesses, because in verbal either you have a right answer or you don't have a right answer. So don't go for the guesses.
Right.
If it's in the math part, quant part, then it might happen that you're making silly mistakes, like maybe a calculation mistake, or maybe choosing the wrong option or something like that. For that, I will say panic less, because if you are someone who's maybe decent in math and want to do really great, then you should definitely, there are different methods, as Isha mentioned, that there is a method called
Mhm.
wherein you look at the options and then accordingly you solve the question. That solves your question easier and faster. So you should look for those methods, because when you solve through the answers as well, it becomes very easy to verify as well that your answer is correct. That is one thing. In the logical reasoning part, it's more about practice. Apart from the main exam as well, the mocks, that is the entire 60 mock question paper, you can also take sectional mocks as well for snap as well. So you might appear for 25 questions, while a section for the logical reasoning, and you might want to practice more from the past year question papers. Definitely the pattern might have changed, but the logical reasoning the logic and the difficulty level has not changed. So you can refer to the mocks earlier as well as the main question papers earlier as well, and then practice more on that,
Mhm.
so that the more you gain the confidence, the easier it gets for you, so you don't make those silly mistakes as well. That is completely fine. Making silly mistakes is completely fine. One thing that I would suggest is note down the particular mistakes that you're making. So every mock that I used to make a particular mistake, that is the main part of the analysis that you're talking about. Whenever you make a particular mistake, note that down in the particular mistakes area. When you appear for the next mock, again look at this thing, that if you have taken, and no, sorry, before appearing for the next mock, go through all the mistakes that you've done in your previous mock, so that you have an idea, okay, this mock I don't have to make this mistake. In case you make that mistake again, you again write it down. You again, before appearing for the next mock, you again go through the mistakes. That is how, once I'm done with a particular mistake, get over that mistake, I'm not making that mistake again, I cut that part, so that I have in mind, okay, I've improved upon this part. That is very important. Knowing the previous mistake that you've made in your previous mocks is also very important, so that you don't commit it again.
I think that should be super helpful. That's an excellent point you made there, Chaitanya. It's very important to know what mistakes are you making, Amrita, because as you said that if these are not silly mistakes or these are not due to lack of conceptual clarity, then you definitely need to figure out what is that mistake that you're making and try and not repeat those, right? But it's important to know what are those mistakes that you're making, right? And only mocks can help you realize that. That's an interesting answer, Chaitanya and Isha. Thanks for that. Right. We'll move on to the next section now, and we're approaching the end right now. So this one last section that I want to touch upon is what are those things that, according to you, one should keep in mind before on the day of the exam, of course. We'll start off with Isha again. Isha, what are those things that someone should keep in the back of their mind when writing the snap on Saturday?
One a very close friend passed on some words of wisdom to me, and I'll pass it on here. That it is not the end of the world, right? Do not panic. If this,
Absolutely.
yeah, because it's when you really stress upon it is that you mess up during the exam. When you panic, what if I do not get this right? What if it doesn't work out for me? So being in a state of ease and being at peace in your head is really important. So if you follow that philosophy, that maybe not this exam, the next exam, so if you do it with a relaxed mind, there are chances that you would do it right, and that you would be able to focus on what's important at that point in time, which is the questions, and not what will happen if you don't get it right. And so yes, that is one very important thing. And like I said, a day before the exam, it's a good idea to just brush up formulae, to go through ratios and the things that you need to have on your tips to be able to solve questions quicker. And your strategy, like Chaitanya mentioned, if you note down your mistakes and if you note down your strategies, you have a final strategy in place. You have to remember, do not get distracted, do not get carried away with a question or two. Just stick to your strategy and stick to finishing questions quicker and not trying to solve whatever you have. Yeah, that.
Right. How about you, Chaitanya? What are those things, or what is the wisdom that you'd want to pass on to everyone who's taking Snap on Saturday?
Definitely, the first thing that should be on your mind is that you're the best. You've really worked hard for this. You're going to do your
Absolutely.
best and completely give it your best. It's not in your hand. At times, it might happen that you've scored really well in your mocks, but there are also times when you don't score really well. Even the
Right.
99.9 plus percentilers have also seen the low times as well. So it's not necessary that you are not that good on that day. It's just that sometimes things don't work in your favor. So that is the reason I mentioned earlier as well. Appear for more than one paper, and definitely the things will go in your way if you work really hard. Second thing that I would mention over here is, as I mentioned, that the thing about the confidence. The next thing I would mention is, as Isha also touched upon that point, keep your strategy in place. That is very important. It shouldn't be like the first question that you see and you panic that, okay, this is not something that I was expecting, then you change your strategy completely. That shouldn't happen. Even if the first 5 to 10 questions are not in your favor, that is completely fine. Stick to your strategy. Keep on doing iterations. Keep on moving on to questions. Keep on skipping questions. Keep on solving the questions that you feel, okay, I can do this in the first 10 to 20 seconds itself. There will be questions wherein you'll not even spend more than 10 seconds, and I can assure you about that. So definitely go ahead with those questions. Even if in the towards the end of the first round of your paper, you've only touched upon 20 questions out of the 60 questions that you have been asked, that's a great thing to do. Even I didn't touch my, I think I touched only around 19 questions in the first round that I went for, because I was completely sure if I read the question, it clicks me in the first attempt itself, then only I'll solve that particular question. So it is completely up to you. Take your strategy. Do not change your strategy depending on the first 2 3
Mhm.
questions. It might happen that you might have to change your strategy, but that is completely fine. Do not panic is the most important thing. And the next thing is, if keep that in mind, that if the question paper is really difficult, then it is difficult for the others as well. It's not only you who's going to suffer. It is ultimately a percentile game. It's completely fine. That is not a problem. So do not keep that in mind. And third thing would be just be calm. Maybe I would definitely suggest, before you appear for the exam, before you move out to your houses to write the exam, definitely meditate. That calms you down like anything. I've done that and it's really worked out for me, because you don't think about anything else apart from the paper that you're going to appear for. So that is really important for you. And as Isha mentioned, that just brush upon the formulas and all of that you've put in place. And if you feel like, okay, these are the definite set of questions that are asked year on year, so I can move on,
Mhm.
I can check on those. So that will really be helpful for you.
Again, tremendous piece of advice, right? Even I feel the same way, that anxiety is the killer. It's very important to stay calm, be focused, and be able to tackle the paper then, right? Different people have different ways of coping up with stress and anxiety, right? But it's very important to ensure that it doesn't get the better of you. Okay, it can make or break things for you, right? And of course, it will mostly break things for you rather than making it, right? So try and stay calm. And of course, as Isha said, it's not the end of the world, right? It's just another exam. And thankfully, there are 3 attempts at Snap this year. In fact, there were previous year as well, right? When we were writing the Snap, I think there was just one exam. You have to wait another year. I think I wrote the Snap about 3 or 4 times, before I actually was able to convert those calls, right? So yeah, just to keep that in mind, that you always have to be persistent. This is not the end of the world, right? It's just another phase of life. This is another part of life, right? You write that exam, move on with it, focus on other exams if they are coming up for you, right? But not dwell too much on it. Great, folks. Thanks for doing this. We're pretty much at the end of the session. I'm still looking at a lot of questions in the chat box right now, and I'd like to pick some up before we wrap up the session. Right. There are a couple of questions right now. It feels like there are a lot of people who are first-time test takers, right? Who are still trying to figure out what should be their preparation strategy. And we're just moving away from the exam strategy bit now and focusing on preparation strategy, right? Maybe again we'll start off with Isha. Isha, what was your strategy when you went into preparing about the exam?
Right. So the preparation for CAT is a lot different from SNAP. So I've heard so many times that
Hmm.
people are under this impression that now they've prepared for CAT, they're kind of sorted for SNAP and other speed-based tests. But I would suggest you to do
Right.
a very exam-specific preparation. This is a speed-based test, and it's not as difficult maybe as CAT is. So what I did was I went through a lot of previous year papers, and I noted down the topics that were consistent or common in all of those papers. Then I watched a lot of videos on YouTube, and that's free, so you might as well. And because
Hmm.
people solving previous year questions and some mocks that have been very consistent to the actual paper. So I noted down all those topics, and some of them I had already covered during my prep for CAT, and there were some that were new to me. So I ensured that I had first covered up all topics. So, like Chaitanya said, in this exam, you cannot risk leaving a particular topic, because what if you get easy questions from those topics, and then it's a percentile game? The others are going to get it right, and if you don't get the easy ones right, then you're sort of in trouble. So that's how I went about it. And then once I had covered all possible topics, I would take a lot of mocks. I would take one mock each day, and then I would note down my mistakes. I would note down things that I need to change and the topics that I had learned recently, but I wasn't performing well in. So I would give some time to those particular topics after each mock. And then then it would be my objective to not mess up those particular parts again in my subsequent mocks. So by following this, so I always wanted to see a better score in each mock. So as long as you're doing that,
Right.
it kind of builds a confidence also. And yes, you cover
Hmm.
most things.
To Chaitanya, is the syllabus different from what the syllabus is for CAT and other exams? And also, what is your take on getting coaching, and in what mode? Should it be in-person coaching? Do you think online also does the trick? How do you feel about
So
this?
regarding the syllabus, it's definitely a lot different from what CAT is, because the logical reasoning
Okay.
section over here tests you on your basic aptitude and your ability to solve certain logical reasoning questions. There is a section called the critical reasoning section, which is also a lot different from what CAT asks. So definitely the syllabus is a lot different from what CAT is. So you need to prepare accordingly. As Isha also mentioned, that a lot of people have this misconception that if you've already prepared for CAT, then you're all sorted for SNAP, but that is not the case. You should definitely go prepare to do research. As Isha mentioned, that research is very important before you start for preparing for any exam. You should know what type of questions are asked, what is the syllabus for this particular exam, and then accordingly prepare. Because if you are not working according to that and you're just working hard, also doesn't make sense, and you lose out on a lot for that as well. So definitely, even in quant, there are a certain type of questions that is not asked in main cat as well. So, and the difficulty level makes it all the more different. So you need to be very clear with the basics. There might be a certain pattern cat as well, depending on depending on the questions. But then you should be mostly prepared for snap particularly. So you need to prepare accordingly so that you're not testing your skills on the basis of the question, but you're testing it on the basis of the speed that you're able to solve it with. So that is one thing. Now talking about the online offline thing, in my opinion, it doesn't make much of a difference. If you are someone who can sit at home and actually dedicatedly study with the right amount of dedication that you will be able to give in an offline coaching, that is completely fine. Make sure, in fact, definitely, I would suggest go for an online maybe, because that would save you on a lot of time and travel, and you'll be able to practice more questions during that time as well. And in if offline, if you have a particular coaching in mind that is offline, that is really popular and is actually doing great, and is giving results, then definitely you should go for that as well. That is completely fine.
Right. And I'm going to pick up one last question now before we wrap this up. Is maybe Isha can answer this. What is the process? What is the selection process this year? Are there any changes? Is it the same as last year? Could you just quickly touch upon that?
Sure. So from what I know, the only changes that you're now allowed to take all attempts. So you can take three chances at the exam. And post that, if you get a call, you have a GEYP, what by what section where there's a group exercise, there is a written ability test, and there is uh, a personal interview, right? So that is the same as before. And I would just say that right as of now, do not stress a lot about that leg of the journey. Just focus on exams, and once you get that you have ample time. And also SIBM has committees that really help you through that process. So once we're done with exams, we host sessions where we would help you in how you can ace that part. So yes, please, I would just wish you all the best for your exam, and that's all that you should focus on right now.
Well, thanks, Tarisha. And again, we are at the end of the session. Chaitanya and Isha, thank you for doing this. We truly appreciate your time today. And I'm pretty sure everyone who's attending right now is looking forward to taking the test on Saturday. Will massively benefit from all the advice that you've given on this webinar today. Once again, thanks for your time. And for everyone who's attending, who's going to take the test, we wish you all the best.
Thank you so much. It was
Thank
my
you,
pleasure.
folks.
All the best, everyone.
Thank you so much, guys. All the best to everyone, and hope to see most of you next year on campus.
Right. All right. Thank you. That's the end of it.